So some of the trends that were identified by Richard Katz of EduCause recently, when he looked at what was happening on campus, was that students were increasingly putting pressure on institutions to become more flexible. And in some respects, they were voting with their feet, in the sense that lecture theatres tended to diminish in terms of numbers attending throughout the semesters, and there were dwindling tutorials and an increasing demand for flexible access to higher education. Many on-campus students, certainly in Australia, in the UK and North America, are working up to 20 hours a week to pay the fees and to cover the costs of studying in higher education. So flexible access to higher education is really the key moving forward. And I want to speak briefly about 5 generations of flexible access or distance education technology. This will cover the last 100 years, but particularly the last 30 years in a few slides. So when open and distance universities were created, their focus was naturally on providing flexible access to educational opportunities. So I'm going to speak briefly about these models and then move on to look at blended learning. I go back to Generation Zero, which is the traditional face-to-face, I've called it chalk and talk, and highlighting that people had to be in a particular place at a particular time and work along with their class. So there wasn't too much flexibility in many respects, but there was a lot of interaction, a lot of advanced interactivity. And I want to introduce the institutional variable costs of providing support, because increasingly resources are tight in higher education. So the first generation of distance education was based on correspondence education. There's some highly powerful instructional design went into those materials, designed for student learning. And in effect, they became very successful. But as technology changed, there was a great uptake in distance universities and open universities of new technologies like audio tapes, video tapes. Increasingly, the multimedia mix emerged in higher education, and the asynchronous mode of having flexible access to this was also a very powerful development. The third generation was what's sometimes referred to as the remote classroom, and that's when the electronic technology, the sort of video conferencing and the like emerged. But what tended to emerge then was a loss of flexibility and a replication of the classroom, but at a remote site. So again, we have these complexities of costs as we use more technology, more infrastructure is required, and the costs of higher education become even more challenging. But once the internet became more powerful, then I think we had the opportunity to have lots of interactivity, lots of flexibility, and the institutional variable costs tended to be coming down. We tended to have the opportunity for economies of scale, but at the time the internet was introduced, often teaching staff were worried about the numbers of people in their online classes. So that tended to mirror what John Daniel refers to as the cottage industry of perhaps 20 students in a tutorial on campus, then 20 students in a tutorial or in a group online. So there was a limitation in terms of economies of scale. But once we started getting a bigger handle on higher education via the internet, the interactivity, the potential for students to contribute significantly to online interaction meant that we had the best of all worlds, that we could capture good dialogue, we could capture useful resources and share them very readily. So we had the potential to start bringing down institutional variable costs. I'm not saying that we necessarily did that, but I think a challenge for sustainable higher education is how sustainable is it? What is the business model underpinning the way that we operate universities? And I think it's significant that not a great deal of research is being conducted on that item. If we look through the program for this conference, we've got lots of interesting work in pedagogy and collaboration and so on. But the business model underpinning higher education is not a very salient comment, salient focus for the conference. So I'm going to give one example of managing variable costs using repositories and using the internet in a cost-effective way. So a few years ago, we started developing a web self-service question and answer repository for administrative support, because students often ask the same sorts of questions. So we created an online service which meant that students got an immediate answer if there was a match by keyword in the database, and it didn't involve a staff member unless there was no match. So when we started this, people said to me, well, nobody will use it, they'll ring up or they'll come to the counter, nobody will use web self-service. But of the 25,000 students at the University of Southern Queensland, we very quickly found that the use of the service grew by the number of visits, where they got answers to questions that they wanted immediately. And that service has sort of plateaued out at about the level that we had in 2008. And again, coming back to the business model of how we support this service, Gartner produced some figures a few years ago saying that a face-to-face contact costs about $8 and a phone contact $5 approximately, the figures on the screen there. Whereas web self-service could be provided for about 24 cents. Now, when we applied that to my own university's use of the USQ Assist, as we call the service, we found that of the 278,000 client visits, 186,000 used the self-service opportunity. Equivalent costs, had they all come to the counter, would have been, almost $1.5 million. They wouldn't have had as good a service, and even a phone inquiry cost would have been approaching $1 million. So what we believed was that we provided a better service at a much lower cost, and that we saved about $1 million. One of the projects that we're working on now is to apply that to academic support. Now, it's a slightly more complex model, and there isn't time to go into it, but the principle is the same, that often students ask similar academic questions, and we try and capture good dialogues in our repository, our learning objects repository, so that students can get the answer that they require when they need it, without involving a staff member. I did have a link to the internet for this, but unfortunately you'll have to wait until we get home to look at that. But we've devised a Moodle plugin which enables the staff to enter the dialogues that they feel will be useful for future students and add to the quality of the repository. So again, we're applying a business model orientation to how can we have high quality interaction at lower cost. So we start looking at what's happening on campus in traditional universities, and the use of blended learning, the thoughtful integration of online and face-to-face teaching is a significant trend, as we all know.